All right, just before we go on to run over briefly the kasha we had at the beginning of the Maimah, which was a little bit elusive, that we could say in a more simple way that the question is that since the Ovis and later on the Yidden who received the Torah at Mount Sinai are really one and the same. I mean, the Ovis are also Yisrael. It's therefore Yisrael were anyway going to receive the Torah, and the Torah is the kavanah in the whole Bria. That was why the Eibishter gave the Torah in order to make the Bria real and to make it have its proper. Was not. I say it was not. Don't look at that while we're learning, if you don't mind. I agree it's of importance. Kavanah, meaning that was the purpose of the whole creation, was the giving of the Torah to Yidden, which means that Yidden, who were really stemmed from the Oves, were anyway going to get the Torah, and that was a essential thing to the whole, what you might call purpose or success of the creation, was the union of the Torah. So a brocha is something that you give like outside the normal run. A brocha is a union that you're mamshich to somebody as a special blessing outside what you might call his normal expected attainments or things that are anyway going to be due to him and so on. So maybe the kasha is that since Yidden, who are anyway from the Ovis, and the Ovis are part of Yidden, are anyway going to get the Torah, albeit not right now. Like we said, the world was waiting for the Torah, and albeit that's only at a later stage. But anyway, they're going to get it anyhow, and it's an essential part of the whole movement of the creation into its kavanah, into its ultimate purpose. So something which is ultimately going to be your obligation, because you're going to have to get that in order to carry out your role as the essential purpose of the creation, then it's not really shad to give a bracha on that, because you're anyway, aleph, going to get it, bait, you have to be a medium for it anyway. And so a blessing is really something that we give you that's unexpected and miyuchad and special outside the normal expected run. Therefore, that's the shadow. Why did Yitzchak bless Yaakov with Torah? Because sof kosof, he, as part of Yisrael, was anyway shaykh and due to the Torah, and the Torah is an essential part of the kavanah in the whole creation. And since that's the case, what's really shad to bless him with that? Because blessing seems to be something unusual and out of the way that wouldn't have necessarily fallen into his, as you might call, spiritual coffers had you not given it to him. But here it would have anyway come his way or to his generations, and it would have been essential to the whole creation, which means that he was obliged to use the Torah and to carry out his function through Torah anyway. So what's the point of blessing him with Torah? That's the heart of the question. Right. So there we go on, and we saw that all of this, even in the light of what we saw when we get to the previous Maimah, that through your gear in Torah, you come to a comparably higher inyan in the revelation of Torah, and you come to koiches in the nefesh, which are also beyond the normal seder of gilui of the koiches nefesh, dafke through the inyan of struggle and effort in the inyan of Torah. And we saw that that's the case even to the point that somebody who's a brilliant person and anyway gets the main point right from the beginning, he doesn't get it in the same way as somebody who works and struggles and toils in the inyan of Torah to get it. And we pointed out that that's connected bikar with the inyan of kavanah. In other words, the pnimiya's purpose of what these different inyanim in Torah teach us. Omno, adayin ein kol ze mishashiv. All of this doesn't quite settle yet. V'hala yodua, it's well known, the klolas inyan hayigiyah, but shebatoira Nishchadesh al yidei mei mariva. The general concept or necessity for struggle and effort in Torah came into the world. Nishchadesh, it became a new Inyan. Al yidei mei mariva. Now, mei mariva is a name for the waters of strife. Well, that's a name for the waters that Moshe Rabbeinu brought the second time out of the rock at the end of the whole 40 years in the Midbar, prior to their going over to Eretz Yisrael, when they didn't have any water, and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and instead of, according to Rashi, and also we'll see according to Pnimis HaTorah, instead of speaking to the stone, as he should have, he hit the stone with his mateh, and that brought out the water. And that was considered the sin of Moshe Rabbeinu, that he should have spoken to the stone and not hit it. That's what Rashi is mavaya, and it's also mashma in many of the sources of our sages, etc. Even though there's a lot of discussion around that whole inyan in the great Meforshei HaTorah, but that's the basic pirush which we're concerned with at the moment. So he said that the Yagiyah in Torah came about through the Mei Mariva, Shehiko Moshe es HaSela, that Moshe smote the Selah instead of speaking to it, as is well known. Adi Deizeh Nishchadesh, it became a whole new inyan of Shritim Yagiyah B'Torah Lavoi El Amiti es HaKavana. That from that moment that he smote the rock, instead of speaking to it, there came about a whole new necessity of struggle and effort and toil in learning Torah in order to come to the genuine purpose of what Torah has to reveal to us. In other words, to not only understand the inyan deeply and properly, but also to know what it means and what is the purpose and the aim of that inyan, but again to the bureau of the whole world, etc. You have to struggle and toil. Because behold, it was said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Nema Elov, it was said to him, Udibatem el hasela, that the Eibishter said to he and Aaron, and you should speak to the rock. Now it's well known that this is the well-known rock. This was the rock that originally, way back at the beginning of when they just come out of Mitzrayim, there was also a case where there was no water, and there Moshe Rabbeinu was told to hit the rock, and he did, and then there came out water, and this was the same cellar, says Rashi. This was exactly the same rock, and it went all around through and followed them in the desert and so on. And there's a whole dramatic development there that Rashi brings down, Shem Medrashi Chazal. But you at the moment that they wanted to speak to it, it disappeared, and so that everybody Moshe hesitated because he couldn't see the rock which he knew was the right rock. So everybody else said to Moshe Rabbeinu, what does it matter? You just hit any rock, and they were scorning and arguing with Moshe Rabbeinu. And he said, no, he can't do that. He must find the emesis of the right selah. But in the end, Moshe Rabbeinu got angry with the Yidden, as it's brought down, and so he decided to lift up his staff and hit one of the rocks anyway. But at that moment, he happened to find the right one, and he hit the right one with his stick. So he should have hesitated for a moment and not hit it and go back to the original order of speaking to it. But because he was so, as you might say, irritated or angry, Moshe Rabbeinu, the whole development that had happened with the Yid, and then he hit the stone. That's the story according to how Rashi describes the whole drama that happened in that terribly delicate chait, as it were, of Moshe Rabbeinu. accompanied by Aaron HaKohen, because both of them were affected by the same Gezeira which came about as a result of that dramatic incident. But the one who actually did it was Moshe Rabbeinu. So the original instruction was that you must talk to the seller. And there's a whole view in Divrei Chazal, when I get to that, since it was the same seller, and we're going to see that the seller represents Sinyonim in Ruchnias, that when they first came out of Mitzrayim, and the seller was literally young, it was just at the beginning of its career, as you might say. In other words, it was just the beginning of what the seller represents when Yidden were just coming out and beginning to become a people according to Torah. Then, Ein Hanami, there needed to be a hitting. It was proper that there should be a hitting, and the Medrash even compares it to like a small boy that when a boy is small, sometimes if he doesn't want to learn, then you have to give him a little smack with the stick in order to keep him on his learning and keep him in discipline. But once he's been through many years of study, then you don't need to hit him anymore. It's enough just to speak to him and warn him, isn't it? But that's what we were relying around around here. We just talk with people, assuming that they're already very big and adult in their desires and the kesher to learn Torah. Anyway, that's what's written there in the Medrash. And the seller was already together with the Yidden. It was sufficiently developed that he didn't need to hit it at all, and therefore the divine instruction was to speak to it. And it would have been enough had he just spoken to the seller, because the seller was now on a much higher madrega, and he needed so with the Yidden. And so when Moshe got angry with them, to a certain extent, he was also underestimating the Yidden. That's what I'll soon mention it again. Anyway, that's what he was told to do. Ne'amar alav v'dibartum el hasel. V'isa b'yalkut. Now, when we say Yalkut, we mean the famous anthology of the Medrashim called the Yalkut Shimoini. It's called Yalkut Shimoini in Parshat Chukas, which deals with this particular Indian. Now, the Yalkut Shimoini is a very early, in the time of the Rishonim, a very early authority that he did a great deal of work on the Medrashim. Even in his Managolas, there was available to his hand many early Medrashim, which nowadays we don't have them so much. Nowadays they're beginning to find them, print a lot of them. So he made a sort of a gathering together of many quotes. He also quotes occasionally from the Gemara and other things to link in with what he is doing with these other Medrashim. And he sometimes quotes from more well-known Medrashim. And that's called the Yalkut Shimoini. So they're told very authoritative, because he was a very great authority himself, and he quotes from these very early sources that he had access to, that many of them were later taken by the Goyim and put into their libraries or into their coffers, into their chesvos, and it's very difficult. Only in modern days that they've been able to reach them. So that's the Yalkut Shimoini. V'yisa b'Yalkut Shimoini. When our Rebbeim refer to Yalkut Stam, then that's what they mean, the Yalkut Shimoini. So it's written in the Yalkut, Shnei Olov Perek Echad. The Yalkut says when Hashem told Moshe to speak to the seller, he said to him, learn upon it one perek of Mishnayos. Shnei Olov Perek Echad. In other words, the word Shnei is from the word Mishneh. Mishneh is the name for, and the Mishneh is based on the word to repeat, as is well known. The Mishnahs were things that were given over Torah Shebe'al Peh, in the oral Torah. So repeat upon it, or say upon it, a perek of Mishnayos. But the Abbot just said, if you'll just say a perek of Mishnayos at the stone, then it'll give out its water. Because lo hoyu tzrichim yagia klal be'esek haTorah. That had Moshe Rabbeinu obeyed that, and he would have just said a perek of Mishnayos at the stone, then we wouldn't have needed in all generations to come we wouldn't have needed effort and toil in Torah and in the business of Torah. But through the fact that he hit the stone, then unfortunately we do. And therefore he just says, V'chulu, he doesn't want to say the negative side of it.
But there was no Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, so what was the Mishnah quoting? I mean, so there was no Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, so what was the Mishnah quoting?
No, but Moshe Rabbeinu, he'd already heard all the Mishnayos on Mount Sinai. He did all the Mishnayos.
So our Mishnah is different?
Yeah, our Mishnah is just what is a repetition of what Moshe gave over to everybody. Mm-hmm. What they're different in Machloikesan, the Machloikesan are only that we're not sure what was actually the right thing said by Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, where there's fallen down, because it was Torah Sheba'al Peh, it wasn't written down. So over the generations, a lot of doubts grew up as to what was really the real ruling of the Mishnah. So that's a differing opinion. But the actual Mishnah itself was received by Moshe Rabbeinu without machlekes. That's what he says now. Ukedisha b'tikunei zoya. It's written in the Tikunei Zoya. Now, you're all familiar with the fact that there's two works, or three works connected with the Zoya. One is called the Zoya HaKodesh, that's the Zoya itself. And then there's one called Tikunei Zoya, which means literally the ornaments or the statements of the Zoya, like brief statements of the Zoya. And then there's another thing called Zoya Chadash, but it was a later manuscript that was found, and it's also in the same way as the Zoya, but it comes, it's also according to the Parshiyas, and it's called Zoya Chadash. So the Tikunei Zoya is not according to the Parshiyas, no, the Tikunei Zoya is a whole series of biurim on one pasuk. There's about 69 or 70 different pirushim, and they're called Tikunim, Tikun Aleph, Tikun Beis, all the way through, I think, to about 70. And they are all pirushim on the pasuk Bereshis bara Elokim Eis HaShamayim V'Etzah. It's 70 different biurim, some of them very long, B'derech HaPnimius, B'derech HaKabbalah, on the pasuk Bereshis bara Elokim Eis HaShamayim V'Etzah. And particularly the whole tikkun is just each tikkun starts off again with the pasuk Bereshis and says another pshat.
So could there have been other? Could there have been other tikkunei zohars on other pasuk we may have lost or something?
I don't know. I really can't say about that. It's Kedisha b'tikkunei zohar tikkun kof aleph. Now tikkun kof aleph is one of the longest ones. It's a very long tikkun with many different observations and pirushim and inyonim. Tikkun kof aleph, daf nun gimel beis. That's according to the particular print. The daf numbers are according to how it was printed. It was printed in different ways, in different letters, sizes of letters, and so on. So according to that particular print, what the Rebbe is quoting, it was daf nun gimel beis. The imloi, it's written over there, the imloi democho bo. If it weren't for the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu smote, the word mocha in Aramic means to hit. If it weren't for the fact that Moshe had hit the stone, mocha bo, lo yihavu torchin Yisrael, v'tanoim v'amoraim be'iraisa de B'al Peh de ihu selah. He said the Yidden and the Tanoim and the Amoraim would not have had to sweat and toil, torchin, Lashon tircha. When you say, I'm sorry, I caused you a tircha, you mean I caused you a hassle, I caused you extra effort that could have been avoided. That's the word tircha. That the Yidden would not have had to struggle and have tremendous effort, neither would the Tanoim v'Amoraim in the Torah B'al Peh, in the oral Torah, and the Iu Selah, that the oral Torah is called Selah, according to the Tikunei Zoya. In other words, that had Moshe Rabbeinu spoken to the Selah, that's the oral Torah, then he would have got a different relationship with the oral Torah, and we would have been able just to learn Torah through speaking and learning Torah. We wouldn't have to struggle. But the fact that he smote the Selah, and therefore there's a view over there in certain portion, even a certain remnants to it in the Tikkun itself, Why is Teresh Baal Peh called Sela? Because the samach of the word Sela represents the 60 Masechtes. The Mishnah is 60 Masechtes. And then the Lamed is indicated another Indian, Ayin of another Indian, and that indicates the closeness of the Teresh Baal Peh. V'havenofik Ma'yer, had Moshe Rabbeinu not smitten, but he would have spoken to the stone, then it would have come out water. Nafik Ma'yer, what Ma'yer in general is Torah, B'loi Kushia u'machloikes, without kashas and differing of opinion. Now that gets to the point you raised, that there wouldn't have been all the doubts and the different shittas, what did the Mishnah really mean and everything. It would have been just clear, Melachatchila, what is the opinion of the Mishnah. So we see that it's clearly stated in that Tikkun Zoya that the whole reason we have to spend so much effort and time coming to the truth of what is really the emissary purpose and pshat of the Teresh Baal Peh, well, that is because Moshe Rabbeinu hit the stone. Had he not hit the stone, then the water would have been available to us without all the Indian of what we call pilpul and struggle. It would have been without kashiyah. There wouldn't have been any difficult questions because there wouldn't have been any apparent contradictions, and also there wouldn't have been differing opinions as to what did the Mishnah really say, or what did it really mean, or what was the emissar halacha lepoyo. All of these things would have been melachatchila obviously clear. Va'ininu, says the Rebbe, what sort of inyan is that? Dehine yadua the Torah be'etzem hi bechinas eitz hachayim. Yeah, like it's written in the pasuk in Mishlei, Eitz Chayim hi la machazikim bo. But it's well known that pasuk is referring to Torah. The Torah is the tree of life to those who they hold on to it, to those who they grasp the Torah, hold it for themselves. So it's well known that in Gan Eden, Mikedem, when the Eibishter planted Gan Eden, prior to his placing Adam v'Chava in Gan Eden, then it's written that there were two main trees, even though there were many other trees, and one was in the center of the Gan, and that was called the Eitz Achayim, literally the tree of life, meaning something that's essentially life without any other mixture of any other doubtful contributant or doubtful mixture, void of anything that could lead to anything negative. And put it in another way, it was something completely free of peselas. What peselas means, like not pure material, or not, how would you call it, no waste, as it were, in it whatsoever. In other words, that it was how the Torah would take you immediately to the emes and to the emes of Kavanah, and would elevate you in spirituality to the highest form of yichud with the Eibishter, and therefore your life would also be a life without any connection with negativity or any necessity to busy with negativity or to be put off or busied with lower matters. And that's what we call the Eitz Achayim, and that was in the Gan, that was also in Gan Eden. And there was no Isser to eat from they weren't prohibited from eating from the Eitz Achayim, but it appears that at the beginning, the way they were, there was maybe no special requirement that they eat from the Eitz Achayim, because they were anyway on such a madrega. They were on a very high level, where all of their inyonim came purely through Gilui Elokus and through Torah, and there was no necessity to be busy with lower or negative things because they didn't exist. So therefore the Eitz Achayim was there in the Gan, and you might say it was the ruling factor in the Gan, and Adam and Chava just automatically, they were on that level, as it was indicated by the Eitz Achayim. And that's what he's now moisif, the Eitz Achayim ein boi shum ta'arivus ra u'peseilus klau. He said the Eitz Achayim doesn't have any mixture of evil or what you might call not usable material, waste material, klau. Umamela ain't shum dover hamalim umastir klau. In Torah, how it is mitzad the tree of life, then there's no thing which hides or covers over any issue whatsoever. Omeir oyer ha'emes, and the truth and the ultimate emes and kavanah and all those inyonim in any detail in Torah shines forth automatically. Kamoishu, exactly as it is. Beli shum yagia v'toy toyreach, or beli shum yagia v'toyreach klal. It's not necessary any effort or struggle, because everything is begolo, everything is what you might call malachatchila riba. It's all noticeable and seen right from the beginning. Now, what he means by saying there's ain't shum dova amaylim u'master, because there's no tarivus ra, meaning that at the time when Adam Rishon was placed in Gan Eden, then there was no mixture of good and evil. Because the mixture of good and evil, that came about through the eating of the Eitz Hadas Tevora. We'll also mention that in a second. And Eitz Hadas Tevora was the confusion and the mixture, and what you might call the staining of the Toiv with a presence of evil. So that even though you have a Dover Toiv, but you also got together with it a certain mixture of something that needs to be negated in order to really bring out the Toiv and make the Toiv a lasting Toiv. Then you've got to in some way negate a mixture of something undesirable. And the other way around, wherever you have an evil in it, there's always some trace of Toiv boy, and that is the hope that eventually we can eventually bring that evil to some sort of correction and tikkun alidei that will be teifus the teif shaboy. So sometimes the union of the Aveda is to emphasize the teif and be shoyl the ra, or sometimes the ik is to push away the ra and just leave the teif. It depends on what sort of a union and how it goes. The famous Sikha, the Rebbe in the Likutei Diburim, when he describes how he was in the prison and how it was when he was in the cell, what he said, that was a terrible evil thing, that was eating from Ra, but he said nonetheless it was Dvarim Teivim Shabazeh, and it had certain inyanim which could be described as milas. Was one should never know of such milas. What he points out is that from the union of the Eitz Hadas and further, you can never really say that something is absolutely tuiv, but in the same way, you can never really say that something absolutely ra, because everything's mixed and murav, as they call it, zeba, mixed and how do you call it, drawn together in a combination, zeba, bozeh. And the Rebbe said, but Eitz HaChaim is Malachatchila, the whole world was in a way where what was the emes was betatlas gilui, and it was only a question of just going higher and better and better. So it was a very unusual and special type of life in Gan Eden, where we just go higher and higher. And that's what's going to be when Moshiach will be here, taken from Yad now, or put it this way, when Moshiach will be Mizgale. I mean, here he's already here. The question is, Ad Mosai will be the Yizgales. That'll be the Aveda, that just going higher and higher, incomparably from one level to the idea, because then the Indian of the Eitz Hadas will be Botel. Yes, Ruach HaTov Avir Min Ha'oret. And the whole Aveda will be only in the Eitz HaChaim Oid HaPam. But the difference will be that it will be on a much greater level, even than it was then in Gan Eden Mikedem. And that's what we say in the brachas of the Nesuyin, how they call it, the brachas of the Chasna. We wish the Chasna and Kala that their life should also be Bo'if and Kozeh, that it should be Gan Eden Mikedem, it should be just like it was. The union of Adam v'Chava, Kisamecha Cho Yitzircha B'Gan Eden Mikedem, with the whole Aricha, the but that's Mikedem, in other words, from a Zamadrega, which is higher than the normal situation, how it is mitzad the Ta'arivus of the Eitz Hadar. But in the Eitz HaChaim, it's not like that, and therefore there's no necessity for Yagia, because Yagia is only when you've got to enter into a confused situation and struggle to get to the emes, and therefore he said there's no Dover Malimu or Mastir, and it's well known. Brought down over there in the Tikkun Isaiah and in the Meforshim over there in the Tikkun Isaiah, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in the Geras HaKodesh in chapter 26, which is not all that far back when I get to where we are now. But the Alter Rebbe brings over there every Kashia, and that's what he brings here that we would have learned. Poloi Kashia, every Kashia is a form of like a Helenva, a Hester, and really the Kashiyas, as he writes over there in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, the Kashiyas come from the Sitra Achra. The Kashis are not really Mitzad Kedusha. That's what he asked of that. How can you say something in the Torah from the Sitra Achra? Well, that's a certain Helen V'Esther which came into Torah because of the necessity to Mavara, the Eitz Hadas, and therefore the Eitz Hadas places over the Amitis Indian of the Eitz HaChaim a certain Hester. And your avodah is to take away that Hester. Therefore, even though it's a Inim Mitzad the Sitra Achra, also Chas V'Sholem, Emes a Klipper, it's only a Koyach which comes Mitzad the Helam of the Sitra Achra that arouses in you a greater effort, and that's the Indian of a Kushia. The whole Indian of a Kashia in the Gemara is only to make you think deeper and to go more profoundly and to bring out a new Koyach which will be Mavarer and Miyashut the whole confusion which occurred mitzad the Indian Adachet Eitz Hadar. And therefore, which we'll soon see about that in a minute, it therefore uses the expression Ein Shum Dov HaMailem Umastir in the Eitz HaChaim, Paratzo Meya HaEmes K'mo Shehu B'li Yagia V'Torah. V'zeh Shekosu, and that's what it's written that the Eivisha said to Moshe, Udibartem El Haselah, that you must speak to the rock, Shnei Olov, learn upon it one perik of Mishnayos. B'dibur levad, only just speaking. All you need to do is just say the words. B'li toireach v'yagia, without having to say a whole pilpul to the rock. All you need to do is just say the words of Torah. In other words, a few words from Torah Sheba'al Peh, Shnei Olov, perik echad. And Mamera Mamera Levad Beli Torah V'Yagia, without effort and pilpul and struggle, and that would have brought out the water in the best possible way, and then the water would have been in even that it would have also been like the water of Torah Mitzad Eitz HaChaim. I said, what do you need to have to Shnei Olov Perek Echad? Why do you need that Moshe Rabbeinu should even have to speak, and he should have to say in speech a perik of Mishnayos at the rock? The Torah is a very high Indian, it doesn't need to be spoken out. He could have just looked at the rock and thought of some Indian in Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was Kuli Torah. He could have just thought of some Indian in Torah, and if everything was pure, mitzad the purity of the world, how it was mitzad Eitz HaChaim, then he could have just brought out water without even speaking, because speaking is a physical act. When you speak, you use the physical body and you bring out oitziyos, which are some form of yagia. And like the Alter Rebbe says, that when you breathe heavily, particularly, then you bring out from the pnimis man danova mitoichay, or pnimiyusei nofak. Even though the dibur is not necessarily as pnimis as all that, but nonetheless, there's a certain what you might call yagia in actual speaking. Why is that necessary if we're talking about that Moshe Rabbeinu was told to go mitzad the Inif and Eitz HaChaim, just purely mitzad the Torah, how it is higher than the Inif and anything to do with Biru Hara, then why did he have to speak? So therefore the Rebbe says, Umashet Srichim Al Kaponim Dibur. Why do you need at least Dibur even mitzad the Eitz HaChaim, even without the mixture and the confusion of the Eitz Hadas? We could suggest Al Pi Mashu Kosu B'Mokim Acher, that was written in another place Be'inyan es spheres d'Atzilus. In reference to the 10 spheres Harayah and Elam Atzilus, the Isa B'Sefer Yetzirah, it's brought down in the Sefer Yetzirah. Now you people are familiar, no doubt, I don't know if you're familiar, but you've probably heard of the Sefer Yetzirah. It's a very, very early work of the Kabbalah, of statements, very brief statements, which are called Mishnayos. They're actually called by the very early Mekubalim, they're called Mishnayos, even though they're not part of the Shisha Sedri Mishnah, don't confuse it. But the statements of the Sefer Yetzirah are called Mishnayos, and it's miyuchas to Avraham Avinu. The Kabbalah B'Yadeinu, how do you call it, the Maseres B'Yadeinu, is that work was written by Avraham Avinu. In other words, after Avraham Avinu's tremendous effort to reveal the truth of the Eibishter in the world, he was given Min HaShamayim Agila of this whole inyan in Pnimus HaTorah, which he wrote down, calling it Sefer Yetzirah. So it's written over there early in the Sefer Yetzirah, in one of the brief statements over there called Mishnayos, that is brought down, Esas Spheres B'li Ma, Kishalaheves HaKashura B'Gacheles. He says that the 10 spheres of Atzilus are B'li Ma. They don't really have any Mahus. B'li Ma, they don't have what you might call a identifiable Matzia. They don't have an identifiable entity, meaning that they're not Cholila, a creation yet. They're only Gilei Elokus in different forms than the Pshitas of Elokus Mitzad Atzman. Therefore, you can't call them Ma, because Ma, in this particular, indicates something you can say Mahu. What is it? So you can't really say about the Esespheres that they're Mahu, even though Lagabi, the Eibishter, how he is, Lamayla Mea Esespheres, then they are a form of a Gilui of a Matthias, but they're not really the genuine concept of Matthias. They're only just revelations of different koichos amitim haraya mitzad the shleimus of the Eibishter, and so therefore they're called Esespheres B'lima. And they're compared. He compares them, the Sefer Yetzirah, Kishalaheves HaKashura B'Gacheles. It's like the flame, how it's bound up or tied into the coal, C-O-A-L. In other words, when you have a ember, you know how you call it, an ember of a fire, what you call an ember or a coal, then it's got in itself a little bit of fire. So that little bit of fire inside the coal, that's called Shalaheves HaKashura B'Gacheles, because the word Gacheles means the ember, the coal or the ember. Now, when you say a Gacheles contains in itself fire, you say a Shalaheves HaKashura B'Gacheles, then you can imagine that in two efanim. You can imagine a piece of ember which is still somewhat burning. Dahainu, that even though it's gone down and it's only an ember, but there's still little pieces of flame visible there. In other words, the flame is kashura, but it's begoloi. You can still see the flame. Another way that we can imagine a gachelis having a flame bound to it is that you don't really see the flame, but you see certain little indications that there's still a trace of what you might call the remainders of the fire, or the beginnings of the fire, however you like to call it, inside the gacheles. And if you blow at it, then it'll give forth the fire. And then what you might call a dead gacheles is one where the fire's gone away and abandoned it. And so if you blow it, all it'll do is just get a bit smoky and unpleasant. But there's a matzav where the fire is still in there, but pnimiyas. Al-Yidei, what you blow at it with the koyach of the ruach peh of the Adam, then the fire comes out. The flame will come out and appear begoloi in the coal or the ember, in the gacheles. So that's what the Sefer Yetzirah says, that the spheres of Atzilus are literally in two levels. They're in a madrega of being kashura begacheles. They're inside the gacheles, but they're not begolui, but they're there. You know that they're there, And then alidei the inu from ruach, alidei the inu from ruach, they come out, begolo. And he says, al derech Moshe, ashalheves kashi betoich. Immediately, he warns us that that's the way we're learning. Because, as I said, kashura bekachel can mean two possibilities. And therefore, the Rebbe said, no, here he means, at the beginning of the Moshe, that the shalheves is betoich hagacheles, he bechinas helem. It's in a form of non-appearance. It's helem. Uketei lahamshich ashalheves me'ahelem ala gilui. To bring the shalhev, to bring the flame, from that state of hiding into the revelation. Hu alidei ruach hanoifeach b'koyach. Here we see, the meaning of naficha b'koyach. You have to blow at the gachelas. You go like that, and you blow, and you give forth a ruach, literally a spirit, which comes out of you through breathing heavily. And then later we're going to see that immediately following that, the Sefer Yetzirah uses an expression, Achasi Ruach Elokim Chayim. One is literally the spirit, the Ruach of the living Eibishter. Ruach Elokim Chayim. Immediately, when the Sefer Yetzirah mentions this Gacheles with a flame inside it, it says that Kilu the answer to that. And the way to make it a living gacheles is ruach elokim chayim. In other words, a spirit, a blowing spirit, literally, which is called ruach elokim chayim. Well, that's well known, the difference between elokim stam and, like we mentioned yesterday, and elokim chayim. Well, elokim chayim is bina, or the from pnima samoichim. That's a high madrega. That in simple mashal, by blowing at the gacheles, you cause the shalevas to come into gilui. Lamaila, the spheres are also like that. What you literally, the Eibishter blows at them, he causes a gilui of ruach elokim chayim. So then the spheres come out of their state of helam, and they also become oirois amislabshim bekelim, in a way that they're ready to be mashpir. The fire is already there in a way that it's able to be a emissar or yichud of oiros and kelim in order to carry out the hashpah that we want from Olam HaAtzilas into the Olamas Bria Yetzirah B'Yah Asiyah. What is that state of the Sfiras Harayah in the Gacheles? Well, that's, we could say two possibilities. We could say that that's the union of the Sfiras Harayah in Sfiras HaKeser. The Hainu, that they're already there to somewhat extent, but they're in a state of all being klulim together in what we call Arich. It's well known that Keser has two madregas, Atik Yoimen Arich Anpin. In the Inif and Arich Anpin, the Sfiras are already klulim there, because Arich is a makor to the Sfiras Harayah and Atzilas, but they're all in a higher and more withdrawn level somewhat, how they are in Arich, but they're ready to go down and be misgala into the oiros for kelim, how they are in Olam HaAtzilas. It's the oiros which have to come down and be misgala in the kelim. So in order to do that, we need a ruach. We need something to literally blow. Or on a higher level, we could say that maybe it's referring to what we call the Esser Spheres Hagenuzos, the 10 hidden spheres. I've put down a whole big arichas about that in the Mitzvah Secha and in many Drushim of the Rabbeim, and also in Ayin Beis Barichas, Bekeshet to that in the first Chelik of the Hemshech Ayin Beis, a big discussion that is what's called the 10 hidden spheres. Well, those are the spheres that they are Lamaila Mi Atzilas, and maybe even Lamaila Mi Arich. They're how they are in a very high madrega, according to Ayin Beis, even how they are koydem atzimtzum afila. But nonetheless, they do have a certain state even there, and in order to make them come out and reveal themselves in the kelim of Atzilas, then like you have to blow, you have to make this union of ruach. So the Sfiras Harayah, Behelem, the Sfiras HaGenuzes, well, their type of Helem is like the Shalhevas how it's inside the gacheles, it's really there, but it's behelem, it's not noticeable, and it's higher than the Indian from Gilui al derech harogil, and therefore it's oirois beika, which are not yet able, mamish, to be mislavish in the kelim, because the kelim of Atzilus are already another hamshocher, they're already a koyach of limitation, mamish, and for the oiros to come down and be miskara in them is a certain effort kavioch is necessary. What's it's in from literally naficha. What the Eibusha makes a special type of revelation which will bring those oiros as they are up there, bikar the oiros into the kelim. But the chiddush is that those oiros, even how they are in the Esesphiras Haganuzis, have already got a certain identification. They're already Eser and not just and he got nothing. They're not just shitas altogether. There's already 10 of them, and they're, as it were, in a very high and elevated state, ready to come down and reveal themselves, each one in its own limited kli, which is waiting for it, kaviochel in olam ha'atzilut. And in order to do that, we need, and that's like the flame which is hidden. It's like a hidden flame, and through blowing at it, it's going to come out and enter into its keli and shine in a way that will give off light. Mamila, that's the marshal brought down over there in the Sefer Yetzirah for the Indian of the Esesphiras Adayala Maila me Atzilas, and they're coming down Begilui into Atzilas, but that's the Indian of Naficha Bekoya Kaviocho. Like we said, Lamaila, that's the Indian from Ruach. So the Alter Rebbe points out in a few places, and the evidence is, maybe we might, if we finish this Maimah, we get round to closer to Chanukah. There's a very wonderful Maimah in this Emshich about Chanukah here, a bit further along. Maybe we might learn that. And there the Rebbe talks about this Indian of Ruach. He talks about how a fire, a candle, needs air, and the air is needed from Ruach. And he talks tremendously highly about the Maila of Ruach. In other words, that Ruach is one of the 4 elements. Here we have Eish, Maim, Ruach, and Ophar. Normally we say that Eish is the highest of all. Eish is a very delicate and high level, and then we say Ruach, and we say Maim, and then Ophar is the heaviest of them, or lowest of all of them. Here it's mashmeh in this Inyan, and also in the Kutei Torah, where the Alter Rebbe mentions this Inyan of the Sfiras Arayal, Maila Me'atzilas, etc., it appears that the Inyan from Ruach has got a Maila even over Eish. So Ruach produces and is Megala Eish. On the day what you first of all have Ruach, that can bring Eish out even from a state of Helem and cause it to be Begoloi. And Chas v'Sholem, Chas v'Cholila, there should never be any Ruach which would blow Eish in a way that it wouldn't be to the benefit of human beings. And that's what we've seen just recently in the United States of America. It was Rahmanin Islam, Hoy Eloisia, Shem Ishmarena, Mikol Ra. It's been the most terrible fire, which probably has never been known anything like it in the history of the whole United States, and maybe even in human history. As I'm in fire. And it's a pillar that people don't talk out. I mean, that is dafkili achre, what the Americans sent and were loichets and spoke Begoli that they're going to be loichets. They're going to force Yidden to give back, not to give back, to give over. Inyanim from Eretz HaKodesh, Ikarim, K'mo Yerushalayim, Ha'atika, and all of those inyanim, to give it into the hands of international rotzchim, but it would be terrible to give it to any goy. To give it to us Elchanas, to put it into their hands is immediately boom. The Shkivon in America has Amitzot Matzah. There's never been a Amitzot Indian, and anybody with any seichel, the Kedusha sees immediately the Kesher. And the same with the Gush Katif. Immediately, 2 days after, what the Americans gave their okay, and they backed it, and the people were starting to be driven out of Gush Katif, there occurred in America a flood which has also never had any annals in the history of anything like it. And also millions, over here, a million people at least have been put out of their homes by one fire. And over there was millions of people lost their homes. So whole states were just covered with water, and flooded out absolutely. And then there was hurricanes and tornadoes. It all went a while along Hampshire, massive. Kama shavuos vafilu chadoshim from such inyonim which are not b'derech harov klal. I mean, a tornado occasionally occurred. What there was then, Poshet lo yadu, many tens and 50s of years I've never seen any such thing. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, you can just see. That when you're going to come close to Moshiach, that everything in Hashgacha Pratius and Allah Yinonim Benegeh to the Gila of Moshiach will be more begola. Everything is going to be more open. It's going to be more clear where everything is going, and therefore people will talk about the Inif of Moshiach. And they will shrey and be mo'era one the other to say, Hine Hashgacha Pratius Zeh, Hine Elokeinu Zeh. And it's amazing, my wife's got an elderly uncle and an aunt, but they live in the west coast of America. She called them up. And they're frying her, but they said in this Shatzaterim mitzvahs. And they said there's never been anything like it. It's just incomparable to imagine the damage and the tragedy that's happened through this fire. It's impossible to picture. People just have no idea. And so my wife said, but she's heard that there's some rabbis who say that maybe it was a visitation because of pressing against the Holy Land. And he didn't fly out of his kalim. He didn't say, oh, what are you saying? You know, what's he just said, oh, he said, I've also heard people saying that. That's what he said.
Who said this?
An uncle of my wife. Oh. He's an elderly man, or he's a Marek Yom himself. What is going on around here? Where are all these Rabbonim here on earth to sort of sustain this? Why don't people come out in a massive way and wake up people to realize that that's what Rahman and the happens? When you interfere with the Eretz HaKodesh before Mashiach comes, that's what happens. There's always been clear indications that you can't do that. Even in the time of the terrible Helen Esther, in the latter Middle Ages, at the time of the Crusade, this mistama given us inyan. But mitzad the riboy achar, it wasn't so begolin, so noticeable, etc., etc. But now it's just mamish. You can see that dafki koydem biyas HaMashiach. Everything is written on the wall. Everything is clear. Everything is borrowed with Tachsapira. So it's a mitzvah to be more of people. It's a mitzvah to tell people to wake up. And it's a mitzvah to tell people that instead of being lost in all their old ideas, it's not appropriate and doesn't fit my old ideas, and forget about all their old ideas and forget about what it fits and what it doesn't fit. You've got to say, Ad Mosai, and we want Moshiach. No, it's just no way out. It has to be done. No, person I say, oh, I'm not used to it, I don't have time. Oh, in the meantime, precious time is going by. You know. Just say it. Where's Moshiach? Say whatever you like. Zog, I hope Moshiach will be here. Don't like Ad Mosai, you don't like Yechia Melech Moshiach, you don't like Chabadskis. Okay, do it your way. Aber the Rik is Shrei. Al Kapanim, we go back now. That had Moshe Rabbeinu Yemot spoken, look at what would have been. It would have been a ganz hard. Andere no, I have had my hesitation. Why did the Eibshter let it not be that way? Why is it that his most precious servant of all of his people that he ever had, and the ganze history of mankind, the Eibshter let him kill our fault, the Eibshter. But then it was a simon that these things had to occur, and there had to be this Yerida. Oh, but the Rebbe says it's enough already. Oh, that's what the Rebbe said. That's already. Now we're going up and we're heading for Moshiach. Okay, so the Rebbe said that you're blown on the Shalheva, so you've got it coming out into Kilui, and that's how it is, but again to the Sfiras. So here the Rebbe doesn't go into the whole, what's that in of Ruach, Lamaila, in Olam HaAtzilus. He doesn't he doesn't really deal with that because it's not his ikar purpose here. But that's a whole inyan and a whole necessity of explanation. How do we blow from one madrega of the Sfiras Ariyah and the Sfiras Agenuzes into the inyan for Gilui? V'chulu, well, that's another inyan which is there's a lot of biur, but auch upon him, that's the inyan how it is b'koyach. So she says, v'chach al terach moshel. If we take now by way of a moshel, even though this is important to our whole inyan here, in our inyan it's not really a moshel, it's really our ikar discussion. But lagabi the Sfiras Ariyah l'mayla, it's a moshel. So therefore he says, v'chach al terach moshel al idei hevel peh shel hamadaber divrei Torah shehu b'chinas l'ruach mamalei על ידי זה ממשיך אור התורה ממקורו מההלם אל הגילוי. Or כמו שכתוב, like it's written בספר יציר over there in that sefer, that the Esser Sfiras כי שלהבס קשורה בגחלס achas ruach elokim chaim. Like we said, that's the hemshek of the Lashon over there. שעל ידי ruach, through the union of spirit, or the second, or the first, depending how you count them, of the four elements, then we come also to the union of fire. In other words, that here we're suggesting that Ruach is higher than Eish. And on the contrary, Ruach Dafki produces Eish and makes it come out into its state of full revelation. So here the Rebbe says that we compare the breath of the mouth of the speaker when he's learning Divrei Torah, and he brings the Divrei Torah out Dafki into Dibur, B'teich Piv, well, that's the inner of Ruach. And how do we know it's in from Ruach? Because the Targum, you know very well that at the beginning of the Torah, when it's written that the mensch was created, and it's written that the Eibishter blew into, breathed into his mouth, V'hoya Adam l'Ruach, wie steht dort? And the mensch became a living spirit. So it says over there the Targum Onkelos that he says Bechinas l'ruach mamalei, a speaking spirit. In other words, that ruach is spirit, and mamalei is the Aramaic word for speech, dibur. And the Targum Onkelos says that the principle and the ikar of the breath of the Eibishter into the mensch, which is ruach, helped him have the inyan from dibur. In other words, from that it follows that the inyan of dibur is a ikar inyan in a mensch, and therefore it's brought down that dibur is the highest koyach, even higher than machshava and all the other inyanim, because dafki ali de dibur, you have this ability to bring everything out into Gilui. Like when you speak, people understand what you're saying. When you think, nobody knows what's happening, and you don't really affect the world around you. But the ikar in and of a mensch is that he's a spirit of speaking, ruach mamalei, and ali deizeh mamshichas haTorah mimkoira me'ahelem ela agilui. Through that he brings Torah also from its state of helem ela agilui. Now, what does he mean by helem ela agilui? Because Torah is also given on different madregas and on different levels. And it's well known that there's inyan from Torah how it is in the Tzilas and in the Olam Yonim. And by speaking it out down here, then we bring out Torah into a revelation that it can affect the world and have the pu'ula in the world that it's supposed to have. And therefore we have to speak out, and therefore it's well known, the very famous, if you don't mind, I'll ask you to stop doing that, myself. And as is well known, if you want to use your artistic abilities, then you have to do it outside the shul. Okay? So it's well known that there's a special inyan in learning Torah, that the ikar mitzvah of learning Torah is to speak it out into speech. That when you sit around, you don't speak out, then you have a certain aspect of the mitzvah of limud Torah. Of the ikar inyan from limud Torah as a mitzvah per se is to speak it out. You have to say out and speak out. And therefore, when a lot of people are learning, you hear a tremendous voice, what they call a kol Torah. People say it's very noisy in the Zal, and what can we do? That's how it's supposed to be. Yeah, and Halavai would be even noisier, of course, only from people speaking Divrei Torah. Auch upon him, that's the Indian. Limud Torah has to be dafki speaking. Ruach Mamalele, and through that you cause Torah to come from the higher Oilameth into Gilui in that level where it's supposed to be having its effect, Boisazman, which means that you actually reveal Torah in the world. And he said that's what's written, the Hemshech of the Loshen in the Sefer Yetzirah, that the Esses feels like Kishalevas, and then the Sefer Yetzirah adds the expression Achas Ruach Elokim Chayim, that the one thing in what is called the one key matter in all of these inyonim is the spirit of Elokim Chayim, of a high madrege in Elokim, what that blows like a ruach and causes the spheres to come from their state of Elamela, Elakilui, but we see Davke Ruach, Shalidei Ruach Nimshach Gam B'chinas Eish. Well, that causes the spheres to become a living fire and that they can be mashpil, like we said before, with all their inyonim. So in that regard, we see that Ruach is even higher than Eish. B'chinas Eish, He Gilui B'chinas Hashaleves. Achamash Kosev Kol Zeh B'Lekutei Torah Dibo Amashkel Kamaflegei B'Mesivta Dara Kiya. Well, that's in Pasha Tazriya, the very famous Maimah over there, where the Alter Rebbe begins the Maimah with the quote from the Gemara in Bava Matir that it was a machlekes, a difference of opinion, kamiflegei, a machlekes in the yeshiva of the heavens, meaning in Gan Eden, between certain opinions of the great neshamas over there as to a certain form of the dinim of the negoim. You know what the negoim are, different appearances of these body from negoim on the body in the Torah. And so what about if a white one came before a red one, or a red one came before a white one, etc. There's all machlekes over there. And the Alter Rebbe's got a whole maimah explaining what was the whole meaning of that differing of opinion, etc., etc. So he says over there, in one part of what is a very long and very, very amazing maimah, he brings over there the Alter Rebbe that we see that in Limud HaTorah we need the union of speech, and he explains why, because he said speech is connected with Ruach, and Ruach brings things into Gilui, and particularly in this respect, Ruach is high, and he talks with great length over there about the Maila of Ruach, and that it brings from its higher Madrege in this regard than Eish, it brings Eish Davke into Gilui, and there we said that we find that the Tanoim V'Amoraim, that they were always saying over the Inyan Torah b'dibur, and he says that by their dibur, b'divrei Torah, they were able to do nisim. They made nisim with their speaking in divrei Torah, and that's exactly the connection. That's what the Aves wanted Moshe Rabbeinu, that by the speaking divrei Torah, that the water would come b'derech Mamela. And the Alter Rebbe brings out that certain of the Tanoim V'Amoraim were on such high madregas that they were like, particularly Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son-in-law Pinchas Ben Yoyer and all that those people on such a high madrega, they were able to be poil in the world just through talking divrei Torah. In other words, they got to such a high madrega that they were kilo beyond the biro and beyond the whole Indian L'chei Teitz Adas v'chulu. So you see, if somebody's really an Amos Rebbe, what he can achieve, and why it's worthwhile listening to what he said. Validei. The Alter Rebbe said the tremendous milah in ruach and in speech, benegea to being megale very high things in Torah, and that's what should have been. Had Moshe Rabbeinu spoken, that would have been for all in the way of learning Torah. We would have said things in Torah, and we would have affected the world, and we wouldn't be in Golas. We would be going l'mayla alidei dini from limudah Torah, ve'alidei shehiko b'sela, ve'rachmonim klam. Moshe Rabbeinu hit the sela yoda ha'Torah. The Torah had a yerida when it descended when Nishlapsha b'chinas Eitz Hadas. Instead of being Eitz HaChaim, which is real madrega, the Torah went down and became, as it were, involved in the effect of the Eitz Hadas. Sheyei shom ta'arivas peselas. There's a mixture of the klippas v'sitraka, of zolcha inyonim, which are not purely kedusha in the real sense, because their inyan is a form of like waste material. They're not absolute purity. They might be there in order to lead to a higher form of purity of a b'shas ma'aseh. They're in what you might call impure material. Shemaylim u'mashtir al ha'oira emes. Therefore, since it could be that they don't hide the whole thing, they don't hide because you can come to understand. If you work hard, you get the emes understanding, and you get the if you really work hard and you really have a schus, and you come to know what is the emes hakavana and what is the pnimis of that inyan and so on. But he said the true the inyan from tircha boim ache boim el amiti sadova. But it's a very hard struggle. If he said that what we struggle in Torah, and through that we come to the emes, well, that's really a punishment. That happened through there was a punishment that came into the world through Moshe Rabbeinu's kaviyachol chait. That's why he's making that misjudgment when they get to the selah. And how can we say how can we say that dafke through that we come to through the inyan for Yagir we reach a knowledge of the emes more than we would have without the inyan for the Yagir. We even say that the Yagir that you reach through struggle is better. Even if he's a greater Baal Kishreines and he was able to reach the inyan, but if he didn't reach it through Yagir and you did, then you know better than him. If he just knows it through the fact that he has a very good mind, then he doesn't know the emes. Compared to somebody who comes through you. Then dafke you come to know the amitiyas ha'inyan. It's a very fascinating kanshi. That was a Yerida which was b'derech ha'inyan, and we fell into as a matzah where everything is behelim. You have to struggle. V'ilu, there hadn't been that in, and we would have learned Torah in another way altogether. It wouldn't be necessary to be mavar or anything of v'chule. So we see that nonetheless it would have been a necessity to talk in Divrei Torah. It wouldn't have been just purely ruach, but it would have been ruach mamalele. We nonetheless would have to talk in Torah, and even after Mashiach will come, we'll talk in Divrei Torah. Because sof the Torah is given down in this world, and in order to reveal things in this world, it has to go through the inyan of speech, because speech is the emes hakoyach hagilui. That's the emes ufto, the inyan of ruach. Since we are sof in the world, there has to be an initial dibur, but only dibur, and that's what he said. Shnei lo perek echad, to say a perek. In other words, dibur has to be, but no more than the inyan from dibur, but not toireach, the derech discussion and pupil and effort and the ganze inyan. But that wouldn't have been, and yet nonetheless we say that davki through that we come to the emes words. So we're going to see that there's other similar examples of this type of principle. We're going to get to other inyanim. And it's even going to ask the shaila that l'chera through sin we earn. That was a form of a sin. And later we're going to see connect with the luchos, what the luchos with the sin not only of Moshe Rabbeinu, but that was a misjudgment and a failing on the part of the Klal Yisrael. Is also we're going to see that the luchos shnia seem to have a big mile over the luchos Harishonis, and it's exactly the same type of thing. There had been luchos Rishonis, the whole Aveda would have been a much different one. And through luchos shnias, it's a much more struggle and toil. Yet after that we come to, and in Kampa we hire Madrega, to the point that you can only ask the shaila that l'cha'oira a sinner is earning something. And there's a big klal in the Gemara that a sinner is not allowed to earn. He always has to lose. Don't come to us through the whole different things which are not so good, and maybe even chatoim. There's been a tremendous Yerida, but dafki through that Yerida, we're going to reach incomparably better and higher in, and we want to reach Malchatchila. And this is a very fascinating. That's a very fascinating shaila. But it's a shaila which is even going to be asked, and it presents itself to the mind of the intelligent reader and to the mind of the inquiring thinker, etc., etc., etc. We want Moshiach now take it from Yad, and then we'll, as we said earlier, we'll go back to the Ruach, Mamalalit, the whole Inen Madrega Od Harbe Gavoya Od Yoter.
Can I ask a couple of questions? The original question that why was the bracha given to Yaakov that he should receive the Torah?
There is a question.
Right, but couldn't you say by Pshat that the bracha was supposed to be given to Esav and he wasn't going to get the Torah, so maybe Yaakov was telling him, giving him the bracha that he should get it in?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that involves a more far-reaching question. That Yitzchak really thought it was Esav.
Right.
And Yitzchak thought that Esav was really due to get the bracha. So it's put down later at the end of this Maimah, and in many Maimarot Siddur, that Yitzchak had a mistake. He had a mistake. That Esav couldn't have received this bracha, and it wasn't right for Esav to receive the bracha. Follow? So how come you want to Yitzchak had so comes along the Rebbe, and the Maimah was the Rebbe Mazel Mashiach, and the Rebbe says, he may say Yitzchak had a mistake. You can't possibly say that. But now the Rebbeim say he did. So what the Rebbe said, what they mean is that at that particular moment he had a mistake. But on the day what the Torah came to Yaakov, and Yaakov knew what to do with the Torah. He knew how to use the Torah the right way. Had it been given to Esav, he would have swallowed it up and it would have been lost. I said that's at the Bia and Rav McCain. He wasn't ready then. But the Rebbe says that now he is ready. Okay. How is he ready? Because by learning Torah, all the generations in the Golas, he didn't have affected him indirectly. Their power of Torah has had an effect on Esav. The Rebbe says, now Esav is ready. This mind was said about 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And the Rebbe says that now Esav is ready, and he's been affected by our limud Torah, and now you can tell him the truth, and now he can even benefit as a weapon from those in Yonim what Yidden got the Torah, and he can help bring about, if you'll tell him the truth, he will help bring about. That's what the Rebbe said. And the Rebbe said a sicha. That was a Maimach Siddur. The Rebbe said a whole sicha. If the Yidden will just tell the President of the United States, they will tell him in the name of the Torah that this is the time for Eretz Yisrael to be only in the hands of the Yidden and to build the base of America. He will be happy. The Rebbe said, oh yes, he will also realize. But Alidei when Yidden Rachman tell him the other way around. And I said, oh no, you're the you have to tell us what to do, and you have to tell us to give back Eretz Yisrael. So by that the mom is going against the whole bracha from Yitzchak. That's as he stated. That's the answer. So the Rebbe said that now Yitzchak didn't have a mistake. But at that particular moment that he wanted to give it then to Esav, that was a mistake. But that eventually Esav gets the bracha, he's right. Amazing. That's what the Rebbe.
Second question, just to clarify something I thought about during the Maimah. The fact, if Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have struck the rock, it's a very good question. If he wouldn't have struck the rock, he would have went to Eretz Yisrael and he would have been Mashiach. And that what it says in the time that the Alter brings, that he says that in the times of Mashiach, the Nigla is going to be like just like this. It's not we're not going to be Torah, and that's what it says in the Maimah. But it's only the Torah Shabbat Peh, not Pnimis Torah.
To see, later we're going to quote a Gemara. The Gemara says in Masechta Nedorim that if we hadn't sinned by the Chet HaEgel, then all we would have needed and all we would have received was the Chamisha Chumash Torah and Sefer Yeshua. Why Sefer Yeshua? Because it tells us we went there, that's all. That's all we would have begun it. We wouldn't need Sefer Yeshua, that's all. There wouldn't have been any more. No Mishnah, no. That would have been enough. That's exactly the same idea. That had we not been these readers, then everything would have just been L'chatchila through a Gilui in Torah, how it is in a very high madrega. Just need to reveal certain inyanim and everything else just falls into. But now it all went down in the Chedet, we've got to work a tremendous deal. You need all these things like Mishnayos and Gemaras to break all the koyach of the clippers and everything. But nonetheless, after that we're going to come to an economy we higher madrega than that. That's the question. What's that? What does it take you going through a sin and then through that you're going to eventually come to an economy we higher madrega. This moment will help us to understand.
Okay.
the same similar idea with regards to the Chet Tadas and.
Yeah. In other words, everything, all the things that the Eibishter, he himself, as it were, promoted these things in a way. He allowed them to happen, even in a certain way. We can say, almost put them into happening. And yet we have to say, and he, Kaviola, he's upset about that. But on the other hand, we have to say that he really meant that to happen. And that's this amazing combination in Yiddishkeit between the two. So what we're doing with is what he meant to happen. We're doing with that part.